Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar to talk about the earnings of the first quarter 21. I am Marília Nogueira, IR Officer of EDP Brasil. Today's presentation is going to be led by our CEO, João Marques da Cruz, and our CFO, Henrique Freire, and then we are going to have a Q&A session with the whole company management. We have our webcast on the company's IR website and on the internet exclusively. Before starting, I would like to let you know that any statements that may be made during this presentation concerning future prospects are based on the company's beliefs and do not guarantee performance. Forward-looking statements involve risks and uncertainties and depend on economic conditions. With that, I'm going to turn the call to our CEO to start. Please, João Marques da Cruz, you may start.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Marília. We are going to start our webinar. And I would say this is the first quarter of 20. And why 20 quarters? Because we do have a 5-year plan, 21 to 25. And that's why this is the first quarter of this long journey. So my first remarks, although brief, are not going to talk specifically about the results of the first quarter, but about our strategic positioning in this marathon of 20 quarters. As you can see on screen, that is going to show very soon, our strategy in these 5 years is to have balance between growth with financial discipline, looking into future businesses, but always having efficiency in current businesses. The 3 avenues of growth, distribution, transmission, and solar. Solar, be it in distributed generation now, mostly on B2B segments, and also utility scale together with EDP Renewables that belongs to the same controlling holding that is Independent. And financial discipline is paramount with a strong policy of dividends that is clear and that in practice says that if we are not able to find investments according to our financial discipline, we are going to go on with the buyback of our own shares, or we're going to pay out non-recurring dividends. We have an indebtedness level that we believe is comfortable with a net debt EBITDA ratio from 2.5 to 3. And we intend to have a local rating that reaches AAA. Efficiency is essential in all our businesses. No doubt in our sector, it is those that are very efficient and are always seeking more efficiency that will deliver results. Thus, we want to be efficient in managing internal costs, in delivering before time our transmission projects as well. And also our asset rotation strategy, that is to rotate assets that we create when we acquire greenfield licenses and then deconstruct, and I'm thinking of transmission lines, and the segment is fit to the rotation of assets, and then selling those assets when they are operational and therefore capturing value. We want to pay close attention to the market liberalization, the opportunities of the free market that are present today, either by offering integrated solutions in energy, in the decentralized generation or solar energy. So networks are important for us. Distribution networks are important, but also solar decentralized energy is also important. And all that can only be done by having an internal digital transformation. And this is in course, and it is a strong initiative. Finally, a note on electric mobility. We are sure that Brazil leads several areas, but not electric mobility. But this is an area we want to pay attention to, especially in this segment. So this is not new. It is a strategy that we presented some weeks ago. So now let's take a closer look at first Q21 and how it fits the strategy. If you go to the next slide, we can see basically there are three very important things here. First, we had very solid results. Solid is the right word. Results that are positive, that are good in a challenging environment. I don't think that we have to explain what the challenging environment is. We all know the restrictions that we lived in the first Q. Some of the restrictions are still true today, although at a lesser volume, and therefore having solid results in a challenging environment just shows that we have a resilient company and a company that is capable of delivering its targets. And so in this first game of a championship of 20 quarters that will take us to 2025, I would say that we had a positive note. Although, you know, we are ranked not by ourselves, but our market, but we are very satisfied with what happened in the first Q. But, you know, the game is not won. This is a game that is long, more than 90 minutes in this case. Now, going into a bit more granularity. Our distribution business had a good performance with significant capital expenditure, given the circumstances of approximately 225 million reals. The energy distributed volume increased by 4.4% in both areas, São Paulo and Espírito Santo, and we had the tariff readjustment with the increase of partial B. In the transmission business, well, this is an area that we are completing 83% of the total capex already executed. We are delivering, we know that the offset had a partial entry into commercial operation, lot 7, and we also acquired a lot in Maranhão. In generation/trading and customers, first in generation/trading, we have this integrated management of generation and trading with a very good performance, which enabled us to mitigate risks. Risks that, you know, investments in hydro energy always carry. And we had positive effects of more than 23 million in the renegotiation of GSF in the free market, and therefore positive aspects. Just as a reminder, in this quarter, we acquired AES Innova, talking about customers, more specifically solar. And also we completed the acquisition of Blue Sol, which is our vehicle to work on solar energy, in which we have a minority stake now. Financially speaking, we had an EBITDA of 1 billion reais, which is an increase of 50% year on year. We are very pleased with the amount. And the same applies for the net income, with an even higher increase compared to the previous year, with almost 500 million reals in net income. Also, a positive behavior for PMSO below inflation. Clearly, the major pressure is on PMSO is the inflation, and we closed the share buyback program with the acquisition of more than 24 million shares. Our net debt adjusted EBITDA ratio is compliant with our targets, which are between 2.5 and 3. Well, these were my general highlights. On the next page, we're going again to go into further detail. I'm going to say some of the highlights, and then I'm going to turn to our CFO, Henrique Freire. Capital expenditure. In 2021, it will go past 2 billion reais. And here we have the breakdown. Transmission was very important in the first Q. It's not going to be so in the following quarters because, as I said, we are completing a lot construction. More and more, we want solar energy to take its position, and distribution is always the core of our investment. But in this 5-year plan, 60% of our recurrent investment is going to be on distribution. So we are going to reinforce organic investment majorly in distribution. Again, 60% of our investments in the 5-year plan will go to distribution. We are going to complete our lots under construction, bet on solar energy, and obviously continue with recurring investments related to conventional generation. And now I will turn the call to Henrique Freire, our CFO, that are going to present our consolidated results for the quarter. Good morning, everyone. We are going to go to the next slide, slide number 5, where we have a first snapshot of our results, both EBITDA, corporate EBITDA, and adjusted EBITDA. This quarter perhaps was, sometimes we have more challenging results, others easier, but this quarter show positive results at any perspective that you can have. I'm going to go by business and the main factors that led to the results, and then we'll talk about, we'll take your questions. As one mentioned, we have 50% above our EBITDA by business year on year. So a very relevant factor, with the highlight to distribution and hydro generation, with a much better result than last year. But even if we take a look at our adjusted EBITDA, and remember, these are adjusted of IFRS and transmission. So, and a bit closer to our cash EBITDA, so to speak. And also the correcting VNR and other non-recurring items, we are still 34% above the last year, with the main highlight again for distribution with 123 million and hydro generation with 69. Distribution benefits from the tariff readjustment of last year, especially in São Paulo. In Espírito Santo, we still haven't had this tariff readjustment, and this is going to be captured further on this year. And also, we had some positive market reaction, even in the residential segment. We are going to see that further on. Hydro generation, higher allocation of energy than for better results, a very positive factor. And the commercialization company also with positive results. Today, you know that we have a 4-year markets to market, and we were able to add a very good margin to the results of this year. Next slide, please. Here we talk about our net income, 83% above last year, with almost 500 million reais. A note on financial results. It is negatively affected because of IGPM for two reasons. First, because of the debt that we had, the liability, not the debt, but the liability that we had in GSF, in ASL. You know that last year we had gains of 389 million with an extension of our positions, 67 months with hedge and extensions, but that we had an amount to be paid and almost 17 million reals that have already been deposited and have to be mitigated by the rules of CCE in May, but it's still indexed by IGPM. So this is an isolated fact this year, but in this quarter we had an unfavorability showing. And that means that in distribution, we have the use of public goods that is also indexed by the IGPM, which negatively impacts our results. All other income tax, etc., are positive in line with our better results. And in equity equivalence, the highlight are the results of Celesc. We are always consolidating one quarter before, that is, we are consolidating 4Q last year. So Celeste had better results increasingly and already is contributing positively to our results. So let's go to the next slide. And here I talk a bit about distribution. Well, in volume, we had an evolution in the residential segment, as I already mentioned before, by 7.7%. Higher temperatures, higher use of air conditioning, which always impacts positively our results. Industrial segment with a good reaction this quarter. So we are still in the pandemic, but we do see a recovery. But the pandemic is still affecting services and commercial segment, which are still slightly below last year. Losses, well, this year, you know that there are restrictions posed by the pandemic and that puts us pressure on losses. However, we had a stable result in São Paulo with total loss of 8.6%, which is exactly the same what we had last year. You know, if you go to the detailed number is slightly decreased, and in EDP Espírito Santo also a drop in the indicator. So these are the numbers that are not still at the levels that we want. We continue to invest with best practices, and restrictions have been major and do have an impact on the evolution of our variable. A positive note here is our recovery revenue per real invested. This is a very positive evolution from 28 last year to 71 now, and that has to do with a better intelligence in focusing our measures. Although we had limits for the cutoff of energy, on our default customer base, which is one of the most effective mechanisms to recover revenues, we are able, by means of other mechanisms, to recover revenue and having a very high level of collection. So that's the positive note, and that will support, as we are going to see further on, our levels of bad debt and provisioning, which are at acceptable levels, not what we want, but even better than previous quarters. Let's go to the next slide. Well, this is a chart that we like to highlight, which is the comparison between regulatory and accounting EBITDA. And today we are at 170 million above when you think of corporate EBITDA. You have VNR, you know that our distributors are getting to the end of cycle, and those numbers should increase. but in our adjusted EBITDA, that is corrected because this is a non-cash effect. But even if we were not to consider this number, we would have a bit about 100 million above our regulatory EBITDA. The highlight goes to our operational expenses with gains compared to regulatory target, and also a market variation that is positive. Others, which is the sharing of infrastructure, losses in PEVCLD, but these numbers that are not out of control, although slightly below what we expected. Now we are going to talk about transmission and how we are evolving. Today we have 2 lots in full operation and lot 7 in partial operation that just started off operation this quarter. And we have here some of the results in operation. In terms of evolution of works, we have 83% altogether of the work executed. Lot 7 is on the final lap of its second stretch. Lot 18 goes on. Lot 21, one of the stretches today is basically finished. And then Lot Q, which is a lot that we acquired in the secondary market in Rio Grande do Sul and Santa Catarina, is at 45% today. But one of the stretches is also in final completion, so still this quarter we should complete one of the stretches of Lot Q. And in the last 2 days, we completed the acquisition of an additional lot in Maranhão that we had announced before, which is an additional investment of 85 million, but is in the beginning of the design phase. So we are showing very good performance in execution following the rationale of on cost in evolution of works and ahead of the delivery dates. So I think this is really important to highlight. Now let's go to the next slide. Here we talk about hydro generation and commercialization. We like to talk about hydrological risks altogether, showing also our trading performance for this line. And here we can say that hydrological risk would have impacted us by 58 million. Our mitigators offset the number, and our trading in terms of margin had a positive contribution of 64 million. Seasonality, we had, especially in the months of January, a concentration of seasonality, which was a strategy with good results. And then we have some concentration in the months of the third quarter, where we expect low GSFs and therefore an offset of the previous seasonality. And also where we have a better use of the energy that spots throughout the year. Again, we are having lots of discipline in the monitoring of this risk. As for availability index, thinking of our plants altogether, we have one of the most efficient plants in Brazil, according to ANEEL. And just to show you one of the indicators that is one of the most important. We have 94.1% availability, and if you compare to ANEEL's reference, it would be 91. So we are very comfortable in terms of availability as well. On the next slide, here we are talking about PECEM with a result very much in line with last year if we were to discount the non-recurring effects that we had last year. Again, just as a reminder, we had the ADOMP and the PIS/COFINS credits, tax credits. If it weren't for that, the results would be in line with last year, 134 million in availability. Remember that in February, the plant had a downtime. the Northeast region have also hydro plants. In the North subsystem, there is an offset of solar energy and renewable energy. However, our expectation is for the plant to go back to work this quarter. It is one of the most important thermal plants of the Northeast Brazil, and therefore an important plant for the balance of the system. And I believe for the remainder of the year, it is going to be operating. Next slide. Here, talking a bit of our debt, we reach a net debt EBITDA ratio of 1.8. If you are considering adjusted EBITDA, you would be talking about 2.5. So very much in line with our covenants. If you take a look at the evolution of our indebtedness indicators, so very positive, benefiting from the drop in interest rates. And remember that some of our debts are indexed in IPCA plus, especially lots 21 and 18, and they are still being capitalized because the lines are still under construction. And because they are under construction, they are being capitalized and they don't show in the financial results. And therefore, the increase of IPCA that we had in this quarter did not penalize the results this quarter. Also a note, we had very intensive funding this quarter to basically pay out some of the debt to mature this year. In the beginning of the pandemic, March, April, we had short-term loans that were important, but that was advanced. And today, the level of availability that we have, and we are at a very mitigated risk in terms of debt. This is our cost control, which is a very important point. You know that our PMTO is very much pressured by the IGPM, IPCA indexes, and the IGPM is affected by exchange rates. So not directly, but indirectly, our costs are affected by that. So we know this is a very important variable. And if we compare to the last year, we even had a positive evolution. Although IPC is at 6%, IGPM above 30, I think that's very important to highlight that we are at a very controlled cost. PCLT, the highlight is the distributors. This quarter we reached 30 million. That is the lowest level that we had in recent quarters, as you can see, compared to the whole of the year of 20, which gives us a relief that shows a better recovery of the economy, higher credit from our customers, and a recovery of revenue, as I mentioned before. Let's go to the next slide. Well, here I'm going to turn the call back to João Marques da Cruz for his final considerations in our presentation, and then we are going to open for your questions. Thank you very much. João? I was muted. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Well, let's go to the final portion of our presentation to talk about ESG and our final messages. Well, ESG is not something that we should talk about, but something that we should do something about. If we can go to the next page, financial discipline. And why is this important? Because the market has to recognize what is obvious to know, that basically our valuations is below the intrinsic value of the company. And basically the way that we can work with that is by means of our financial discipline to really unlock the potential of this company. Efficiency, maintaining control costs, even in an environment when the inflation continues to be a problem. And the rotation of our assets. And we want to be leaders in energy transition. And leader does not mean the largest, but those that really make it happen. Well, very well then. Now we are going to listen to the market voice, that is our Q&A, and therefore I'm going to turn the call to Marilia, that leads our IR department, and that is always available to you for your contacts whenever you find a need to hear more about us. Thank you. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Well, thank you, Marcos da Cruz. Now we are going to start our Q&A session. And to answer your questions, we have our whole executive management, in addition to João Marcos da Cruz and Henrique Feiro. We have Luiz Otávio, our VP of Transmission Trading, and Fernanda Pires, our VP of People and ESG. João Brito, our VP of Distribution, and Carlos Andrade, our VP of Clients. The first question comes from Hannah. Good morning. How do you see the role of distribution amidst the growing, the increasing growth of solar energy? Don't you think that the risk of the company gets higher in time? Well, I had difficulty to listen to your question. I'm sorry. This is, the technical problem of this new online world. I'm going to repeat it. How do you see the role of distribution amidst an increasing growth of distributed solar energy? Don't you think that the business has greater risk? Okay, very well. And now I could hear the question, although your voice was chopping. Anyway, the answer is the following. Generation is the future. We have no questions about that. It is the future. As all technologies in the beginning, it is normal that these technologies have to have some kind of support. It's normal. Then, when technologies get a bit more mature, the subsidies stop to be essential. It's obvious that we have to find a fair balance between distributed solar energy, distribution per se, and all other parts of the system. And this balance is essential. With the growing weight of distributed solar, we have to revisit the breakdown of the system's overall cargo and overall load, and Brazil in the next years will have to revisit that. Who pays in a fair way the general charges of the system. With that, I would like Carlos Andrade, our client VP, to complement my answer. Very good, João. It is what João mentioned. Distributed energy is irreversible. The changes that are being discussed now were already anticipated by ANEL back in 2012 or even 2015 when they passed the resolution 482. Which already anticipated a revisiting of the system. But it is irreversible. If you get the projection of EPE up to 2030, there is a whole chapter of, a growth of 20% a year between 2025 with regulatory changes that are to happen. So that shows that solar is here to stay. And you may go on, Carlos. And I think that's it, Maria. That's the message, just to reinforce what João mentioned, that this is irreversible and solar energy will continue to grow. Regulatory changes will happen, but that will not change the fact that, the growth of solar is going to be exponential. There are clear signs of decentralization of the electric sector. Thanks, Carlos Marques da Cruz. The second question is, in the closed share buyback program, what was the average price of the shares? Well, I'm going to start. Well, the short answer is that it was way below what it should have been. But we know the number and we are going to tell you. Our CFO, Henrique Freire, has the answer for you. We had the buyback program. Before the dividend payout, we completed this quarter, but most of it took place between the end of August last year and the beginning of April this year. And the amount was 18.9. That was the average price of the buyback program. Thank you, Henrique. Third question. In a scenario that Celesc is not a privatized company, do you want to sell your stake or do you want to keep your share in the long term? We want to keep it. We do not want to sell it. We are not selling it. And we do not believe that the great state of Santa Catarina is an island in Brazil. We do not believe that the electric sector will all privatize, and there is an island that is called Santa Catarina, and the state is going to hold its company forever. Privatization will happen. I don't know when, but it will happen. And we, in a very comfortable position, will contribute positively. Celesc needs capital. It is not going to be the taxpayers of Santa Catarina that will pay for that will invest money in Celesc by means of its taxes. For the state to capitalize the company. It will be private companies to do that. That's the most efficient way anywhere in the world. And we believe the state of Santa Catarina, sooner or later, we expect sooner, will start the process and fully privatize the company. Thank you, Dr. Marques da Cruz. João Brito Martins, our distribution VP, and Celesc is a distribution company. So could you please add to my comments? Thank you, João. Good morning, everyone. I think João said it all. Celesc is a company that is an improvement process. The results of 2020 were quite good. And obviously, we are paying attention to any privatization signs. And until then, we are contributing to improve the company operationally. It is an interesting company and very strategically positioned in Brazil. And we keep our share. And until the privatization comes, we are going to contribute to its management. Thank you. Moving on, our next question comes from Marcelo from Itaú. Considering an average GSF from 77% in the year, what is the company exposure for the third quarter? Do you have enough allocated energy to cover your short position, or would you have to buy back energy? Okay. Luis Otávio is going to answer this question. He is responsible for our trading position, and Henrique Freire is going to add. But I'm just going to make some initial remarks. Well, clearly, the year of 2021 had very significant drought periods. Historically, it's quite impressive how dry the year was. And that shows the need to reduce our exposure and risk in hydro plants. We have very good hydro plants that are recognized as good, but even those hydro plants have to be adapted to our energy balance. And therefore, we are taking a look at the market to try and decide if we are going to sell 3 of our 6 hydro plants. Not because they are not good, but because we should adjust risks in a structural scenario of less rain and more drought. And all that said very generically, I will first turn to Luis Otávio for his insights. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your question, Marcelo. I'm going to say that the strategy EDP has been adopting in terms of hedge. We had our hedge last year, then we had the seasonality model because of the delay of rains and including the months of January. So we do have enough coverage today considering the lowering of GSF and the increase of PELD prices. Reservoirs are almost 20% lower than last year, 15 to 20%. Right now, 17% precisely lower. And what can I say for the third quarter? We have 2 plants in the north that were allocated according to the north rain period, using lower and higher prices. Even with the decrease, the costs are going to be lower. And the hedging to the San Manuel plant, which is part sold to third parties in the free market with its own revenues. And in the southeast, we have our other plants that are well allocated with almost 24% of hedging right now. So the maximization of our positions did take place. We had this movement this year. We already had 4 different movements as the situation deteriorated. Prices are going to go between 200 to 300 reals. But yes, we, considering what we think the third quarter is going to be like, we are going to do relatively well. I would ask Henrique, and I would add to his insights for him to explain if there is any financial impact. Hi, Marcelo. Thanks for your question. I think this is a hot topic now, hydrological risks. And, the first risks and then effective losses when they happen. Well, you have been hearing us talk about this topic for several years. We always highlight this topic. We are monitoring the issue. We are investing resources. You talk about 77% GSF. This is the average for the year. And as you know, in the third quarter, we can have significantly lower volumes, which is an expectation. But we have, a rationale of risk management. The positions that we take are to mitigate risk, and therefore we defend ourselves from extreme scenarios. So because of the explanation Luis gave you, because of our position, we are relatively comfortable today. It's not a surprise for us what is going on. So I would say that we have this risk mitigated. It's not that it's not a risk, but it is mitigated. Thank you very much. Thank you. Our next question is if we have plans to invest in wind energy. Well, the straightforward answer is no. We have an agreement with a company that is a sister company in the same holding of EDP for in solar energy to have a partnership, and EDP Brasil will consolidate solar farms in what we call utility scale, that is true solar plants with some hundreds, 200, 300 megawatts peak. As for wind energy, we are not going to invest. It will be EDP Renewables that will invest in wind. And I will explain why. Because solar energy is more adapted to PPA corporate contracts. Wind energy is more adapted to public contracts, the auctions that we have in the system. So the partnership with EDP Renewables is very simple, and it is a win-win for both parties. EDP Renewables has the technology, has the sourcing, has the value chains of this renewable business, and we, EDP Brasil, are aware and know the Brazilian market well. Now, the component in which we believe is essential for the Brazilian market is solar. It can be at a lower scale, decentralized, but also the solar utility scale. But basically, it is the client being an international Brazilian company operating in Brazil. In this case, the answer was no, it's not in our plans. I'm not going to turn to any members of our management. Carlos would be the person to answer, but it's not solar, it's wind, and therefore it's out. In terms of distributor volumes and considering that EDP concessions are in industrial areas, what is your expectation for 2021 in terms of volumes? Okay, João Brito Martins is going to answer this question. I think this first quarter, in terms of volume, we already gave you lots of color on data. But we believe that the recovery of demand, especially international demand, that is companies that operate to the external market, is already being felt. We are feeling extra demand. And so our prospect is moderately optimistic. Let's go to João Brito Martins, our distribution VP, to add to the question. Thanks, João. Well, as it was said, we are seeing quarter on quarter, including April, an improvement of our numbers, especially the industrial sector, with a considerable increase. In São Paulo, and in Espírito Santo as well, as Espírito Santo is very much turned to exports with an increased activity. So our expectation for the remainder of the year is to increase our market by about 4%, the two distribution companies together. So again, moderately positive, considering, the context and even some uncertainties that we might have in the year with regard to the country's economy. But today we have a positive bias, growth of the markets, basically driven by the industry. Thanks, João. Well, we are at the top of the time, so the last question. Your debt indebtedness level, is it a concern? You have, lots of debt maturing in 21. Is that a concern? Well, because it is the last question, I'm going to start with a general remark. Transparency is a very important value for organizations and for humans as a whole. I am at the headquarters alone in a room. I decided to be here, not in my home office, to have a better internet quality. I know there were problems in communication. I apologize. But we always try to overcome problems. But really, this online world brings us problems. So I would very much like to transparently say that fortunately, energy is more resilient than telecommunications. But to answer your question, because it's the last, I would like just to say something before, and that would be my final remark. We are a team. Even if I weren't able to say something because my internet the connection dropped, the presentation of our earnings would continue because we are a team. Clearly, this is a team that has management, and our members and our people comprising a whole ecosystem. And that is what I think a company is all about. A company is a group of people, a team. And because this is the last of the question, and because we are a team, I'm not going to answer, and I'm going to ask the team to answer this question. I will bid my farewell. I'm not speaking no longer in this conference. I thank your kind words. And now I'm going to ask my CFO or any of our colleagues to add their insights and answers to this question. Well, thanks, João. Well, indebtedness. I think that we are one of the companies with one of the most conservative positions with regard to debt and liquidity. So we always have a liquidity position. We have some risks, but we have a very comfortable position with net debt EBITDA ratio, even in the adjusted EBITDA 2.5 times, and given the nature of our business, that is quite suitable. And therefore, I would say that we don't have any concern with our debt. During the first quarter, we mitigated the risk that we had of debt up to 1 year when we reinforced our cash last year. Now we are at a different cost and a different level with the market evolving in this regard. And therefore, I don't think there is any concern with regard to that. The Brazilian market and that is not, with regard to EDP, we see that data is being extended up to 20 years, but this is relatively recent in Brazil. There is a major gap of rates between the short and the long term. The liquidity discount in Brazil is very steep. It is different all over the world, but even more so in Brazil. But I think the market will evolve. We also have to consider that the delta in Brazil is higher because of the country risk. But we believe that on our side, the risk is quite well mitigated. We are very proactive in managing our risks, and we take it very seriously. We don't think that, indebtedness risk in Brazil is zero. So that's why we are very conservative and take it very seriously. I don't know if anyone would like to add the question. Thank you, Henrique. It was very clear. Well, thank you. With that, we are closing our Q&A session. The questions that were not answering in the session will be answered by email by our team. With that, we are closing this webinar and wish you a very good day.